Welcome back to episode 4 of our shuttle bus build. We are doing the vent fans, we are resealing the windows, and we are doing the insulation.
If your eyes are the window to your soul, what are the shuttle bus windows to the shuttle bus? The eyes of the soul of the shuttle bus, or are they just windows? I guess we'll find out.
What?
Right across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
Can't do it.
We decided to have 2 vent fans in this bus, just like we have in our bus, but we decided to move locations.
Yep, we had to move one up pretty far because we didn't want to waste any of the roof space where our solar panels could be. So we went past where the rack is going to be and put one in the front, and then one in the middle right by where the kitchen will be.
We also don't love the location of the rear vent fan in our bus because when you're sleeping in parking lots, the light comes right through the kind of opaque cover that's on the Fantastic fan, and it just lights up your bed area. Even though we have blackout curtains, that's been really annoying. And if you forget to put the cover down on the fan and it rains, a little bit of water leaks right onto the bed. So we decided to not put one right over where the bed is going to go and move it into the front. So it was a combination of reasons.
Yep.
Both the vent fans needed extra support. As we talked about in the last episode with our roof rack, the fiberglass that makes up our roof is really, really thin. And you couldn't just put a vent fan down onto that fiberglass without it resting on some sort of metal framing.
Yeah, we had to do this in the last bus too, mostly because you want to put it where you want it, so you do need to put at least a couple supports. We welded those in. You could do it with wood if you have something to attach the wood to. And then the front part of the bus, it's like a separate piece of fiberglass. It's kind of bubbled a bit more, so we had to do a little more tricky support right there.
Yeah, the front of this bus is really weird. The back has a curve to it, but it's one piece. And then where the bus door starts and going forward to the front bumper is kind of this bubbly, just unsupported piece. There's at least 3 inches between the fiberglass and the start of the internal framing. So it's just kind of floating in space. And because we wanted to put the vent fan up there for all the reasons we just mentioned, the solar, all that stuff, we had to put some intense framing into this front part. So we kind of rigged up a weird support system and welded it to the sides because it was really hard to get it on top of the bar and wedged in place. It was putting too much pressure on the fiberglass. We bent a piece of kind of scrap. It's not even tubing.
Yeah.
U-channel maybe.
Something like that.
But we curved it to the curve of the roof, put it up there. I was able to weld the supports on, so I got to weld this week. And then my dad did the overhead welding of the supports actually into place.
Yeah, as most things with this bus, it took maybe 2 or 3 times to figure out how to solve that problem, but we got it figured out. It looks super solid now, so we're happy with it. So once we had the supports in place, we were ready to cut the holes for the vent fans. So we took our template, traced where it was going to go, then drilled out the corners with a pilot hole before we took the jigsaw to it and tried to do our best to cut a nice 14 by 14 square. Savannah did a pretty good job on that, actually.
Yeah, I got up on the roof and I used the jigsaw to cut out the hole. after I did that, we kind of put it into place. It didn't fit the first time. I had to shave off one
Just
of
a
the
little
corners.
bit. It was almost perfect.
But then we put it in the second time. It fit. So I had to scrape the Tropicool again.
Again, guys, maybe wait to do that kind of seal until you got your rack and all that stuff mounted. We're learning that lesson the hard way.
Yes.
It's funny because I think last time we did it that way by chance.
Right.
But not a huge deal, but you add it up, it's a couple hours you end up wasting going back on yourself, scraping stuff off.
So again, I had to scrape the Tropicool off the edges of where the vent fan was going to sit so that I could seal it properly. So once I scraped all that off, this was really simple. It took almost no time
Yeah,
at
it
all.
wasn't much.
We put the butyl tape around the edges of the vent fan and then set it down and pressed it in place. It felt great. It felt really supported when we were pressing on it, so I'm glad that we welded in the supports. It was definitely necessary. And screwed all of it in. We just screwed it into the supports that we had just welded in place.
Yeah, make sure you have support on the other end to screw into. Don't just screw into the fiberglass. It's not going to hold up. So if you don't have support, you're going to have to put something in there.
Ideally, you should be screwing into framing, something that's supported by the rest of the frame of the bus. After we did that, it was all screwed in place. It was secure. I went around the edges and put some lap sealant on all of that over the little screw holes, and the vent fans were complete.
Man, it starts to look so official when you get like a couple of fans in there, the rack up there, it stops looking like a bus and starts to look like this is a little motorhome.
When we did the subfloor, it did change the bus visually, but it's been a few weeks since that,
Yeah.
so I've kind of gotten used to the visual of the plywood on the floor. So this was really exciting to install the vent fans because it was the first really visual change that made it look like a camper
Yeah.
and not just a shuttle
Starting to
bus.
look like it's going to be a house.
Something strange in the bus. What is this? I don't know. Hello, hello, hello.
Next thing you got to do is get down and grab these. Okay, we're going to do our workout here in 1 and 2.
Girl, when you got a weird rubber thing in your bus, work it out, work it out.
When you got a strange rubber thing in your bus.
Work it out, work it out. It's time to work it now.
Then we moved on to the windows, which is one of the best features of shuttle buses. I think they're really nice, but they're also a big point of potential weakness with water leaking and even just insulation. So you definitely want to make sure they're not leaking. Ours had just kind of that foam stuff, which did an okay job on some of them. Some of them were terrible, and the water was pouring in, as you might have saw in an earlier video. Probably roll that
The
clip.
waterfall coming in the bus. Even with this bus, which is 4 years old,
Yeah.
our bus that we built first was a 2007, so it was a little bit older. I kind of expected the windows to leak. But this new one is only 4 years old, and most of the windows leaked, which is just crazy. Things shouldn't be deteriorating in 4 years, so it's just the way that they made them, and the effort they put into sealing them was not very good. So we knew that we had to reseal the windows, and we would probably recommend this to anyone building a bus, no matter how old your bus is. You don't want to just assume that it's fine, build around and over the windows, and then all of a sudden your first rain, or maybe even in 6 months or a year, your windows are just seeping from the bottoms. It's gonna rot everything you built. It's gonna rot your floor. So it's just better to take the time and do it. It is annoying because there are so many windows.
Yeah.
But it's worth it.
You first want to identify if they're leaking, so you could wait till it rains, or you could just get out there with a hose or buckets of water and see where they are leaking.
The basic mechanics of shuttle bus windows is that there is the glass with a frame on the outside of the bus. And inside the bus, there is a really light, really thin internal frame, and it's just the metal, and that's what all the screws go into. So the glass in the frame presses on the outside of the bus, and then on the inside of the bus, the screws go through the little frame that's lined up with everything, and they get screwed in, and the screws kind of suck everything together.
Yep.
So in our bus, what was a little bit unique about it, when we did the demo, we ripped a bunch of plywood off of the walls. A lot of it was rotten, just unusable. And it was about 1/8 of an inch. So when we took all of that off, and then we had that big leak with the window in the back, the waterfall window, we realized that they had installed all of that plywood and then installed the windows. So the windows were used to being seated on top of the plywood with 1/8 of an inch gap. So as soon as we took all the plywood off, there was all of a sudden all this play in the window.
We had to make up that gap with something from the wood that we removed because that wood was damaged. We chose to go with some scrap aluminum pieces that we had available to us, but you could use wood or another material. And once we put those in, it grabbed the windows right back in.
As with pretty much every project in this bus, we had to make some special component for it, and we had to do that for the windows also because there used to be 1/8" wood in here, and it was kind of acting as a spacer to pull the window in, and we're not going to have that wood on the walls anymore, so we had to use metal to make these little spacers that once we pull the window and then we clean it, we reseal it, when we go to put it back in and screw the frame in, these spacers will have to go above the window in this little channel to kind of help the window pull itself back against the bus. Because if we don't have this, there's just a huge gap on the outside of the bus around the window frame. So we made these little things and we're hoping that they work. We decided to use pop rivets to put these spacers in, and we decided to do that because furring strips will be framing out these windows so we can mount our cabinets, our walls, everything to it. And we needed something as flush as possible because if we put screws on there, if they were flathead, panhead, they were just gonna stick up way too much and we'd have a ton of trouble with screwing our furring strips in later. So we went with pop rivets or blind rivets. Our process was to unscrew the internal frame of the window. I would take that frame off, and then Drew would stand outside while I pushed on the window and he pulled, and that would usually bring it out. And you could then go set it down. I would go over and remove all of the original foam from the outside of the window. Most of it came off really easily. I didn't have to scrape too much. And then I would apply brand new butyl tape to the outside. While I was doing this, Drew would take the spacers and clamp them to the outsides of the window frame, and then we would drill a pilot hole. And then put the pop rivet in after that.
And they all lined up really good.
So we would take the window, press it back in place, and then put the internal frame in, screw it all back in. The big difference with this bus is that we did these windows one at a time. And that made a world of difference. With our bus, we took all the windows out at once to reseal them all at one time and then tried to put them back in. When we took them all out, the frame of the bus kind of shifted because it was relieving all this pressure and removing some of the structure of the bus. So it shifted. And when we went to put the windows back in, they did not line up. They didn't line up with the internal framing and where the original screws had been. It took days to get it right.
It was a nightmare. I think part of that was, like you said, taking them all at once, and that bus is completely fiberglass. I noticed the sides on this bus are actually thin metal. So who knows if we popped them all out if we had that same problem, but I do think maybe it's a little more rigid. And our bus, it was brutal. It's just a little shift, it doesn't take much, just a little bit of the stress, and then you're trying to put a perfectly fitted thing back in,
Yeah.
It was not fun. It was really difficult. So I would definitely recommend doing one at a time. And I think you shouldn't have that problem regardless of what the bus is, because it's not going to be under any stress, really.
We just did each window, took it out, reseal it, put in the spacers, put it back in, moved on to the next window, and just repeated that for every single window. It worked out really well.
Yeah, it went smooth.
And the windows look great. After we did all that resealing, I also went through and I used painter's tape so that I would get a clean line, and then went around the outside of the windows and caulked them, just for insurance mostly.
Yeah, it's always good to do that. Just to, if there's any tiny gaps, you're going to seal that up and you're not going to have a problem with it.
Couldn't get a truck today, so we had to use the bus, and we barely fit all of this insulation in here.
On to the next step, insulation. This is pretty key. It's going to keep you a lot warmer and a lot cooler. Like I said before, I really noticed with our bus that we live in being complete and the new bus being just a shell, we had maybe like an 86 degree day, pretty warm. You could really tell between the insulation and just having maybe the curtains, it was much cooler in our bus. So yeah, it's not perfect because you still got lots of windows, but it does do quite a bit to keep it a little more temperature controlled. So what we did, once again, we went with the 1-inch polyiso board for the ceiling and the sides of the bus. Savannah meticulously measured and cut out. I think she drew out and then traced out to not waste any material on all the boards.
I measured and made charts for each section of the walls, and I numbered it the same thing that I did with the subfloor. I just made a little chart, I measured it, I cut it, I numbered it, put it back into the bus based on the chart so that I knew where everything went, and this makes my brain so happy to have everything labeled, everything have a chart in a place. We decided to use 1-inch polyiso board in this bus, and the insulation can be kind of a highly debated issue, but our recommendation is to just use the thickest insulation that will fit in your walls. Don't go past your frame, but fit in whatever you can in the gaps, basically, and that is going to get you the best temperature control for however your bus is built. Our bus has a 1-inch space, so we just got 1-inch board. Mm-hmm. And again, as we talked about with the vent fans, this is one of the biggest visual changes of the bus so far.
Yeah.
We're getting there with all these little changes starting to come together.
Yeah, starting to move along.
Fitting all the foam into the little spaces can be kind of difficult, but it's not too bad of a job. I used some duct tape to help it stay into the places in the ceiling, and eventually we will be installing furring strips, and the furring strips will hang over the edges of the frame and help keep the insulation in place. But for now, a little bit of duct tape worked great.
Yeah. We got 3 major things done this week, and visually you're starting to see some progress. We are getting close to the point where you can really start building in there and kind of moving past this, setting up your foundation point, which can be a little bit tedious and not so fun.
Yeah, these beginning stages can be really tough. You don't know what to do first or what to do next, and it's kind of dependent on what your goals are and how your bus is built. But this is the base of your pyramid. It's the foundation of everything that you're going to do, like cabinets and wiring and your bed frame, your flooring. So you want to make sure it's as structurally sound as possible and that it's done to the best of your abilities and what's available to you.
Yeah, it seems like in the beginning you're really kind of subject to what the bus gives you, and you have to work around those things.
I'm excited to get beyond these phases, and we're already in episode 4.
Yeah.
Where has the time gone? Have you
don't
felt
know.
it? You're like, I have felt
I
those
am
4
tired.
weeks.
I'm tired. Exciting stuff coming up next, and just, keep watching, and hopefully you guys enjoy what we're putting out there.
Yeah, do all those things you do on the internet, and we'll try to answer some of your questions. But we've got big plans coming up for week 5, so stick around. Thanks for being here, guys.
Later.